difficulties.
It's
So what happens when
educational.
you try to do new tech in a Mercury retrograde, right?
Right? I was going to say something about Mercury retrograde. Now that, no, I'm just not going to bring it up.
If we don't
Yes.
acknowledge it, maybe it won't be real.
Part of the system, whatever. Okay, here we go.
Right.
It is what it
Cool.
is, what it is.
Right. Cool. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, hello and
Okay.
welcome to Soothsayer Radio, the podcast of percipient purpose for prodigiously perceptive prognosticators. I am your host, Cheryl Spencer, and in our very first episode, we have with us Teresa Lorraine Schurheck, here to talk about her book, Ace of Imagination. Now, Teresa is an author, a card reader, and a creative genius, among many other things, and I'm so happy to have her on the show. So welcome, Terry, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Wow, thank you. That was quite an intro, and I'm honored to be the first guest, and thank you for having me.
Great. Now, Terry and I first met at a Vipassana meditation center, and after learning about her book, Ace of Imagination, I was really inspired to interview her and to get a chance to dive into her very unique and experienced perspective on the subject of imagination. Now, to quote from the introduction to your book, having a healthy, vibrant imagination is the foundation for creating and living a rich, vital, and fulfilling existence. The games and exercises in the book Ace of Imagination are designed to loosen the strangleholds of unconscious programming and worn-out ways of being, and open your imagination to infinite realms, empowering you to live a richer, more abundant existence as the ace of your imagination. Your imagination trumps everything. So that's very cool. And Terry, tell me a little bit about your background and what inspired you to write the book, Ace of Imagination.
I don't know, I'm still kind of reeling. I actually wrote that. That sounded pretty good. Well, as I prepared for this interview and went back, one of the hang-ups I've had about all of my productions is the about you section, right? How do you condense a lifetime of experience into a few meaningful words? And I guess I could say, I will say that I'm not unlike many, many, many other people who jumped on the New Age bandwagon at a certain point after the proverbial dark night of the soul, etc., and found very little, had some really great experiences, very eye-opening and what have you, but a lot of it fell flat, and a lot of it felt no different. For instance, going to pagan festivals and different rituals at the invites of friends and what have you, it felt absolutely no different to me energetically than, say, going to, the Baptist picnic. The people were the same, and the ideas were, it was all very rote, and the only thing that was different were the costumes and maybe the music, right? So a lot of disillusionment there, but I had the special privilege of working with some mentors and teachers that were very much about the individual and finding your own way. And I had an innate intuitive sense of that it is to each of us to work at our own salvation, so to speak, in our own way. And the first seed that was planted was working with a clairvoyant psychic healer by the name of Garrett Walters back in Madison, Wisconsin. And we worked in very small groups, maybe half a dozen people in a class at a time. And he taught the Berkeley Psychic Institute method of running your energy, your personal energy. And you can kind of akin that, or the analogy is that each human being is like a cell in the body of humanity, and each individual, a healthy cell has a healthy membrane that allows nutrients in and waste out, protects itself, and has its own defense mechanisms and what have you. and it's an intelligent kind of wall. So while I was working with Garrett on this and learning how to run my own energy system and keep it clean and heal thyself sort of thing, one of the first things that he said was, they lied to you when they said it was just your imagination. And that stuck with me. That was a seed that really was the beginning. I pondered that for years and years, and I will fast forward to moving out west in 2010 and continuing on, always questing and spiritual. I had it in me I wanted to know God in me as me, and really understand and reconcile the spiritual experiences I had as a child in the church environment with the doctrine that was being taught, and the personal relationship I had with spirit versus all the things that were coming at me from religious authority. So while I'm working on all of that and building a life out here, a new life, I came back from visiting my son and daughter-in-law and my first granddaughter, who were out at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And so I spent the infamous solstice of 2012 in a military base, which was just fascinating to me. It's like, how did I end up here? I thought for years that I'd be in some, huge spiritual, something going on, right? And I was at a military base. And we actually went to a place called Raven Rock Park. So I wasn't at the base on that day, but regardless. So I come back after a couple of weeks of being in box, immersed in all of the what I don't even know how to phrase it, the big box country, where all the cloned houses and cloned stores and that, and the military and everything, and came back to my sweet little hovel of a house at the edge of the forest in Mount Hood, and was so happy to be home. And I woke up and had this, when I woke up the following morning, I woke to a vision, and I don't know that I've ever had before that or since then, this immense, incredible, intense vision of a raven kachina. And I'm not going to go into all the details of it, but suffice it to say that it impressed me deeply. And
what is that? Sorry to interrupt you.
A raven kachina?
Uh-huh.
All right, so that's the name I gave it. I'd call him a raven man, okay? So it was a man with huge raven wings and this raven headdress, a mask of a raven headdress on, that was hovering over my house. And like I said, I don't want to go too much into all the details. It's a rather sacred event to me, and I'm also still working on the book that came out of this. And so that's what happened. Was I was trying to make sense of this. I started writing. I thought I'd make up a story around it and just start writing about it, and decided to go back to a novel that I had wanted to write 10 years earlier, and was working on that. So I was working on this novel and trying to be creative, and everybody says they want to write a novel someday, right? Why not? Here I am. I have the perfect writer's environment and everything. So I've got that going on, and at the same time, I was also falling down the rabbit hole of what I refer to as modern knowledge, right? Or most people know as modern knowledge, all the conspiracy theory stuff. From the chemtrails to aliens to 5G technology, DARPA, all that,
right.
That whole realm of, oh my freaking God, what are we going to do? The world's going to blow up and there's nothing we can do. And began to feel extremely powerless, which was, and there was something that just didn't sit right with me about how powerless I felt. That there was something inside of me niggled, like, no, we can't just be victim to all of this. I am not a victim. I refuse to be a victim. There's got to be something we can do. And one day I was working on the novel and was beginning to have these incredible experiences from being in deep creative space, that were kind of blowing my mind. And it came to me, this idea popped into my head, and it was almost audible, just like it was so strong it was almost audible. And it was, I need imagination exercises. And I'm like, oh, that would be really great. Like I need to expand my imagination further. I just had this impulse. And I got on Google and I put in imagination exercises, and only two came up, which was
Wow.
blowing my mind right there. It's like, really? What? I mean, there's got to be other creatives out there that need help with their work, So, and one of them was this random, weird, obscure page somebody had written. He signed himself as the Jester, which, if you work with archetypes, that was really weird and synchronistic all at the same time. And the other one was a program by a man named John Rappaport called Exit from Matrix that included 50 imagination exercises. And I went and checked it out, and I perused through it, saw what the contents were, and was set on fire. I'm like, and it brought together, John's work brought together all of the aspects that of my life that I was immersed in at the time, from the writing of the novel and the creativity to the modern knowledge and feeling helpless. And there it was right there, exit from the matrix, right? And with imagination exercises. That was in the fall of 2013, and I became obsessed and immersed myself in it night and day for several years. So that's kind of the background of it. And somewhere in there, where probably by about 2015, I had another kind of one of those hits of, I was getting this message from my own self within to get off the grid and under the radar. And I closed up house, shut down a 3-bedroom house, and put everything in storage, and packed up my car and just hit the road. And when I was out on the road working on all these imagination exercises and my own, development and work in it, and adventures, crazy adventures, the idea for Ace of Imagination popped in. I needed more exercises, and they just started popping in. So I wrote it within a couple of days, and came up with the 50 exercises I have now within a day, 2 days. And the whole thing kind of unfolded for me at that point. So that was a long answer, but there you go.
Yeah, very fascinating. And it's interesting how, one of the things that I thought was really fascinating about the book was that I've never really come across anything that inspires you to develop your own imagination, and
Right.
just, which is interesting, because it seems like a really important aspect of self-development. And I've done visualization work and stuff like that. And I think visualization work in general is more widespread than the concept of strengthening your imagination.
Right.
And I think that's really interesting. And I think that there's something to be said for taking the time every day or during the day to, devote to really strengthening that aspect. I've also noticed that in my own personal development work, imagination or even visualization can sometimes feel really overwhelming, especially if you're just getting started. And if you're not in the habit of engaging in active imagination regularly, it can seem like a huge effort to get started, because I feel like the idea is that, well, this is just my imagination. It's just fanciful. And so I don't know, can you tell me a little bit about your perspective about why do you think that is, and what is imagination to you?
So, all right, let me start off with a simple reply to what is imagination to me. And to me, it is the innate human faculty, It's our superpower. And I think one of the reasons why there is an effort involved is because of all the programming that we've had suppressing it. And I mean, immediately when you start growing up they start telling you it's just your imagination. Get real. Get with the program. You know, you need to play by the rules. You know, all these things that suppress and discourage using your own imagination. And the effort part, again, I think it's because of all the programming, but the essential thing is that imagination is freedom. If you care at all about your freedom, your true mind freedom, and your true sovereignty, imagination is the only path and the only way that you're going to get there. You can't, I mean, there is nothing, like you said, that, you know, like there's not a lot out there. And John said in one of his lectures, there's over 100 hours in this program. He has 3 different programs out, and the Exit from the Matrix is by far the most powerful and one that I keep working with still. That in one of those lectures, he said that, oh man, I just completely lost my train of thought.
Okay, well, while that's coming back to you, I'm wondering, one of the things that you mentioned was in the beginning of your story, you said that, you know, imagination is the way to work out your own salvation. And what I find really fascinating is, because as I said, I met you at the Vipassana Center, and Vipassana literally means seeing things as they are, and without imagination.
Right.
Without, you know, a visualization or imagination of any kind, but it's almost as if by not engaging in imagination, you can see things the way they are because your imagination is reality. I don't know if you have anything to reflect or add on that.
Yeah. It's I'm going to say where I lost my train of thought was that John said that in one of his lectures that you won't find this kind of work anywhere else out there. It's just not in any of the, you know, nobody is touching this stuff. And I'm always suspect when somebody says, I'm the only one who's doing this. I'm always suspect, but he's right. I haven't found anybody else either. And if it wasn't for the proof in the pudding of the experiences that I have and the immense amount of, I mean, my whole life is this work. So I get it and I see it and I feel it and I experience it every single day. So back to the Vipassana thing. It's really interesting that they actually do have you engage your imagination at one point when, particularly in the metta work, specifically in the metta work. So when you get to the end and you're doing metta, they want you to imagine, imagine, you know, if you're having a hard time, you're actually generating something that wasn't there, or that is dormant, or, you know, lying sleeping, which is all the love and compassion and what have you. And they bring you into that. And as soon as you start mentioning certain states like love and compassion for all beings and blah, 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 your mind is already, and your imagination is going to grasp that memory banks, you know, the immense infinite memory banks we have of experiencing those things before. And so you actually are using your imagination. But the idea of no imagination and being with what is a powerful ally and complement to the imagination work for me.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because if I go out and I create something, and I create, you know, and generate certain feelings and watch how they unfold, or certain, you know, very specific things, you know, to materialize or make fact in the world, what have you. I want to be able to be present with them when they arrive, and be completely with what I've created, and be completely in the present moment as well. It also is Vipassana is an excellent way to just strengthen your mind and clean up. I don't know that everybody, it's not, obviously not for everybody. It's intense. Vipassana is an intense practice. And I really liked it because I like to meditate. I like going into that stillness, and I like being able to exercise my mind in that sort of way of completely not letting it rule me, but coming into union with it and using it as an asset and an ally rather than constantly fighting against it. So it's been very complementary to the work. I thought
Yeah,
at first it was
interesting.
antagonistic, but it's been very complementary.
Cool. I want to go back to the idea about uniqueness and individuality and what that means in the context of imagination. Um, you mentioned the escape the matrix exercises and how important it is to have that sense of individuality through imagination. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So individuality and sovereignty is freedom. There's no way to be free without being an individual. And I think we were all meant, it's like, when you look at the individual versus the group, I think the strongest and most powerful groups are groups of allied individuals, not just blind, globular cloning kind of thing. What happens in most groups that we see and in most throughout the culture right now is that we have undifferentiated cells and that we call that are growing at an uncontrollable rate, and we call that cancer. So, the human body, the body of humanity is riddled with tumors and cancer right now. And I think it has been for a long time, but even more so with the age of technology and age of information. But if
Interesting.
you, and if, when we're talking about freedom, the only way to be free is from the inside out. And imagination is the key to do that, and a key way to do that, to exercise your imagination, use your imagination, and play. I have a little, one of my little aphorisms is play your way to freedom. And, we take things extremely seriously, and humor and amusement is actually one of the highest vibrational states that we know of, or, so far. So, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I actually engaged in your one of your enlaughterment exercises this morning. Can you explain a little bit about what that is?
Well, I'm inclined to share a little background on that. I actually became a laughter yoga leader years back, I think in 2011, 2012, somewhere in there. And found it got extremely boring. I don't know if you're familiar with laughter yoga, but essentially
Well,
it
now I
just
am.
teach a lot of. Yeah. Okay. So the foundation of it is that the laughter is the best medicine for the body, and we know that now from you know that from personal experience. I mean, everybody has that experience.
Mm-hmm.
You always feel better when you laugh, and when a situation is so tragic and critical and dire, and all of a sudden when laughter breaks out, it's almost like it's completed the whatever event has been happening. So, but the mind and body cannot differentiate between fake laughter and real laughter. We know this from virtual reality studies, how the body chemistry can actually change, and there will be physical responses in the body in response to visual virtual stimulation, as well as the same as if it was happening in live and in person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, using that laughter yoga does not rely on humor or jokes or funny movies or waiting for laughter to happen. You can generate laughter on your own anytime you want to. And it usually turns into, when you fake laugh, it usually turns into make laugh, but the body cannot tell the difference whether you're fake laughing or not. So it just feels good. And it lifts your spirits, it lifts your mood. Once that's happened, it's good for everybody. So.
So I have a question for
Was
you.
there another question in there that I didn't address?
No, but I have another tangential question, which is going back to the imagination work. Um, I guess my hesitation about doing imagination work in the first place is just that it just seems as if it's inconsequential. It seems as if it isn't really going to make a difference. And intellectually, I understand that when you engage in the world through the lens of imagination, it opens up a whole well of resources that just wouldn't be available to you otherwise. But it just seems really difficult to take the leap of faith, as it were, and start engaging in using the imagination, because it can just seem like it's not really making a difference, or it doesn't really matter. What would you say to someone who says, well, it's not going to make a difference if I practice using my imagination. It's fanciful. How would you convince
Well,
someone? Yeah,
the first thing that, first of all, I'm not interested in trying to convince anybody of
sure.
anything.
Yeah.
There's no proselytizing in this. One of the best things about the imagination is that it requires, in using and exercising and playing with your imagination, is that it requires no belief in anything. It requires no faith. It requires nothing from you other than you just play and lighten up,
Right,
and do
right.
it. And in this case, I would say that and you don't have to undo anything. I mean, how many systems are there out there, methodologies and techniques and blah blah blah, that will have us deconstructing our past and analyzing this and analyzing that, and
Right.
processing and working and all. What the fuck for? Excuse my French. I mean, really, it's just gotten so overblown, and
Yeah.
imagination requires none of that. You don't have to clean up anything, or be anybody different, or anything. But for the mindset of, I don't think that this is going to, have any effect.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I would challenge you that that's a program running. And if that program's, everybody wants to point fingers and say, well, that's mind control, and that's mind control, and, they're programming and they're impressing and da 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 da, and point it outwards, but nobody wants to admit that that's been happening to them, and that
Right.
they've been victim to it. And we all are. I
And
mean,
that they're
we get programmed.
complicit in running that program.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I am still too. If there's nothing else that I have come across, doing all this work, is that it's humbling to, and there's compassion that comes up to realize, I'm still, we're always going to be working with bugs. It's kind of like doing Vipassana. You just layer after layer after layer. But
Mm-hmm.
the other, so the thing is you got to let your why get you high. And why do you want to, what is it that you want out of this life, and what do you want to experience? And if you want sovereignty and true freedom, and to live the life of your dreams, and dream big, and way out, there's no box involved kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
then this is the way. This is the royal road.
So you kind of already answered this, but what do you think are some potentials and advantages for someone who engages regularly in these types of active imagination practices? And also another question related to that, how much time do you think is a good idea for someone to dedicate to an active imagination per day, keeping in mind the fact that obviously there's no oh, you should dedicate this much time, but for someone who is struggling with finding the motivation to uh, get out of the matrix, as it were, and start engaging in imagination exercises, and just needing maybe a little bit of guidance and motivation and inspiration to do that, what would be your recommendation to start?
This is going to sound heavy. If it's going to feel heavy, but I would say an hour a day for a minimum of 30 days. And notice, and then, be on with a sense of curiosity and a mindset of curiosity, what's changing, what's different. And at that point, it's kind of like dating. If after 30 days, an hour a day, you're not feeling or seeing or sensing any results, either this is not the work for you, or you're going to fall in love with it and just go. But it does also take a certain amount of will, where this is a place of, and an opportunity to, where you have resistance to strengthen your will. It's like, your will is important, and the imagination will trump the will at every turn and corner. And the will is still an extremely powerful part of who we are. And you have to be grown up and mature about it and say, this is important to me. I'm doing this. And there is no this is a self-motivated practice and life. It's not a practice. It's a lifestyle, and a full immersion kind of lifestyle for adults and grown-ups. This is about being a grown-up child of God, not please leave me along and help me out at every turn. This is a time where all of humanity is maturing and growing up, and we need to be responsible to our playtime. It just sounds, like an oxymoron, but it's very
That's
true.
great. You need to be responsible to your playtime. I love that. Yeah.
And it's not, the interesting thing is that when you begin these exercises, or when I began them, it felt very much the same way. It's like, oh man, this is, and I was in a creative space and in a creative process. I struggled with it, and I still struggle with it sometimes. It's not always easy, and because the freer you are, the more responsible you are, and there's a certain truth and that just goes along with that. But playing, it's like there's a common easy thing that we target the elites, that they're always off playing golf and lead these luxury lifestyles, and they're at the beach and the president's off at Camp David luxuriating and blah blah blah. But they need that. That time is when you're playing, is when your conscious mind lets go of all of the but and all that monkey shenanigan stuff, and the real creative juices can come, actually get out. And how many times do you have a really great idea when you're in the shower, or some random party, or I don't know, playing basketball or whatever, whatever it is that you do, when you don't if you've got a creative block, as a creative, if you've got a block, you don't just keep hammering at it and what have you. There's a certain amount of, all right, I'm staying on the page kind of stuff. But if you go out and loosen up, take a walk, enjoy a sunny day or a rainy day or whatever's going on outside, hug a tree, whatever. Things loosen up. And it's the same way with the imagination exercises. And you'll find too that the exercises they're seeds, and you'll come up with own exercises of your own, and new ways to engage your imagination on your own.
Right. Yeah. And I was thinking too, because you were describing how to sort of see the world. It's almost like seeing the world in a different light or context when you are engaged in the imagination, which allows you to go beyond the conscious box and the conscious mind, and tap into your resources, which are, you could say, I guess you may have infinite resources in terms of creativity and imagination, but right. I don't know. Do you have anything else to add about that, I guess, or seeing the world in a different perspective?
I certainly do. I used to think too that, nature was the be all end all, we need to get back to nature. Well, even nature is a matrix.
Hmm.
And, like the work of Nassim Haramein or, any of the people who are working on sacred geometry. And I mean, that's all patterns. And anything that has a pattern, anything that's a system is matrix. Anything that is, and imagination and creativity are completely out of that. We go into the void of imagination and creativity to bring new things into the matrix. So it's really, balancing too. One of the things that Jesus said was, be in the world but not of it. So we could go into our imagination, go into, astral realms. There's so much that you can do. You can access it. It's not just an invention of things, but it's imagination is the access point as well. It's a doorway to everything that ever existed. Yeah. And so there's so much written about imagination in, if you notice in the book that each exercise has a quote from somebody different. And you'll see that the people that have really made profound impacts on our world and humanity in a positive way, in a good way, have all been proponents and advocates for imagination in their own experience of it. I think that, I've come to the conclusion that all things exist in imagination, all things. And you can I can invent an astral realm, like let's say, let me pick a simple example. Cash. I need some cash. Okay, I want an extra $100 for something. I can imagine myself going to traveling in imagination to an astral realm where cash is abundant. And you could just walk up to the counter and say, I need a $100 bill for Earth, United States, please. It's like, okay, and he just hands you one over the counter. That's my imagination. That's what I do. But it elicits the feeling and things actually happen and change. But it's not so much for when you're doing these kinds of the exercises that are in the book, it's coming at things sideways. It's not, you're not trying to make things happen.
Right.
You're not trying to change things. You are doing it for this simple fact that this is the nature of who you are, and hopefully it's fun and eventually gets a little bit easier, not so drudgery, and you're expanding yourself. And to know yourself is to grow yourself, and there you go.
Well, I absolutely love this idea of creating a daily practice of it, and I love your prescription of it as well. And I think that's very helpful and practical for someone who's new to coming into this type of work. And yeah, I think it is really interesting what you said about how you got to be responsible to your playtime, and you got to realize that this is important. And if you realize that this is important, then, taking action and doing something about it and taking responsibility for that. So I think that's all really interesting. And I have been doing some of the exercises in the book, and they're all really fun. Do you typically choose a card at random and then go to that exercise, or do you go through it systematically, or what's your method?
I would suggest, and I do want to mention that when I say an hour a day, it doesn't have to be an hour all in one shot. It can be if you have that sort of schedule and what have you, but you can do 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 20, it doesn't have to be all in one sitting. So keep that in mind. And the thing about the actual cards, it's just a way, because I love the playing cards and I have a real affinity to them, and have an interest in rewriting them and bringing in new knowledge. You asked in one of the pre-interview questions about, working with the playing cards versus the tarot sort of thing. And I just love the playing cards. And they have their own massively long ancient history and, theories and what have you that came from Atlantis, and they were in the pyramids, and they were mentioned in the Bible, and blah,
Oh, really?
blah, blah.
Tell me more about that. That sounds interesting.
Okay. Well, let me finish about doing the exercises, and then we'll go back. But yeah, so I integrated those two things, and I do want to. I think that I have one of my chief aims, so to speak, if we're going to speak in personal development terms, is to poke holes in old realities and create new ones, and to turn people on and turn them loose. So the cards for me are poking holes in that old reality, using the cards for imagination, which are a system unto themselves and have been an integrated and established system for millennia. And using, imagination exercises was kind of me being the jester and poking fun at what was and what I love and what I want to see change. So you can it's a way to one of the original concepts was that I didn't want people to have to buy another deck of, cards, so to speak. And I was looking at the book being more of an app that was accessible and a virtual digital thing, so that you could use any deck of playing cards that you had and still help build your intuition by trusting that whatever cards you drew out of the deck and use those exercises that you could. The other thing that, so that's one way of approaching it. Another way is to simply go through and read all the exercises and choose the ones that feel easy and fun to you, especially to begin with. Because the easier it is, the easier you make it for yourself, the more inviting and the more, some are going to speak louder to you than other ones will. And then stretch yourself after you've worked with the ones that you really like. Stretch yourself into the ones that are like, I don't know if I'd ever do that. Those are the ones that can usually produce the most results as far as really popping yourself open.
Do you you do readings for people with the 52 card playing deck? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And so you said that part of the reason you just you've developed an understanding of the archetypes of the cards, and you really use that in your understanding when you're doing these readings. Can you talk a little bit more about your experience using the playing card deck? Because I think that is pretty unique. I know a lot of people that use the Rider-Waite tarot deck, for instance, but I've never heard of, before talking to you, I've never heard of using the playing cards as a divination tool, and it's pretty fascinating.
Oh, well. Actually, it's called Cardtomancy, and it's an ancient practice, and I think, like everything else, there's so much esoteric information and practices that are, finding their way to the surface and coming out into public mainstream. The cards are one of them, but they've been using playing cards for centuries and millennia for divination tools. And I think you'll probably, now that you're aware of it, you'll start running into people all over the place that, I've been using playing cards, Sure. As a matter of fact, I met a woman serving at the Vipassana Center who read playing cards also,
so
it was like,
they're out there. Okay, cool.
But, the specific system that I studied was called the Destiny System, and it was released by the Magi Group out of Chicago in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And it came to me back in '99 through a friend, and I had an immediate affinity to it. You know how some of those things are like, you come across and you're like, ooh, I like this. You know, I was just like, this is cool. And all the ephemeral charts for, you know, like each day of the year is a specific playing card, and each one of those has a life path laid out. There's a grand spread, a solar spread, you know, all those things that you read from. And I was going back through and looking at, and it's based on astrology, numerology, and the cards themselves. And, you know, the 7 visible planets, and everything can be seen in the cards, and all of it. What really fascinated me was that all of it could be, you could pinpoint your whole entire day, minute to minute, the cards were changing and rolling. So the evidence of matrix was just right there in my face, and that fascinated me. So but yeah, the symbolic, or the main symbol for the system, is the Ace of Spades, and that happens to be my birth card. So when I spoke with the author a few months after I bought the first book, which had all the charts and his interpretations, and which were second round of, you know, based on a couple women who did the initial rollout of the material back in the early 1900s. He's asked me when my birthday. I had some questions for him and called him and spoke with him, and he asked when my birthday was, and he was just like, well, no wonder you have an affinity, you know, to the system. You're probably one of the original authors. And then really, I find some, you know, I feel some truth in that. I don't have, I hold no hard beliefs about past lives and what have you. I'm sure that they exist, and I'm sure that they don't, you know, all things, right?
Interesting.
So, yeah. But I just had a real affinity for it. So, but now when I read the cards, there's a mix of other systems, other interpretations that pop up. There's a bank, a kind of a data depository in my mind of others, you know, of all the things that I've experienced with each
the correspondences and whatnot.
Right.
Each one,
and I find more and more that it's just an intuitive. I mean, it's always an intuitive process, but more and more, those intuitions are moving very far away from what any of the traditional meanings might have been behind, you know, clubs and hearts and the numbers and things like that. It's just way
your
off.
personal intuition. Yeah.
And a lot of that, I'm sure, is because of the imagination work that I do. And sometimes, you know, a card that has a long, hard set pattern of interpretation, like let's say the 5 of Diamonds, which would be the 5 of Pentacles in the tarot, right? Lovers without a meeting place, kind of, you know, the lonely people outside the church sort of thing. And now we see it as new money coming in. So, you know, yeah, it's just fun. It's, one of my hobbies.
Now, diamonds correspond with pentacles. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then cups would be hearts, right?
Correct.
And see, I would have thought that spades would have been pentacles, but what are spades? Are the swords?
Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah. So there's some things about the playing cards too, like if you add up all the pip numbers, it adds up to the idea is that it represents an entire year on the planet. So if you add up all the pip numbers, it adds up to 364, 365, the number of days in a year. Each suit corresponds to a season. There are 13 cards in each suit, and there are 13 moons and moon cycles in each year.
Interesting.
All of that. Yeah.
And also, I remember in one of Goenkaji's lectures at the Vipassana Center, he was saying that there are 52 types of mental contents, I believe it was.
Yeah.
Which was fascinating to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
heard
very
that.
cool.
Yeah,
Well, it
all
looks like
systems.
it looks like we're coming at about an hour. I have so many more questions to ask you, but we should probably wrap this up. But thank you so much for coming on the very first podcast. Not only that, but inspiring it in the first place. And can you let people know where they can find you, your book, your website, etc.?
I would, at the moment, it is Ace of Imagination blog.wordpress.com. And Street Smart Spirit is the main body of work, which is also still under construction. So you can email me at streetsmartspirit@gmail.com, and you can also Google Street Smart Spirit, and I should be the only one that comes up at this point. So you can get a hold of me that way too. There's also a Facebook page for Ace of Imagination. We have about 850 followers. We didn't even touch on we didn't even touch on the mystics that are teaching imagination. So there's a couple of people that I would also recommend checking out in the meantime, which is John Rappaport and NoMoreFakeNews.com. And his programs Exit from the Matrix Revealed, and Power Outside the Matrix. And then there's the work of a Christian mystic by the name of Neville Goddard, Goddard, who is all over YouTube and has an immense following.
Oh, I think I've heard of him, yeah.
Yeah. He's all about the imagination.
Cool. And you also have a YouTube channel, is that right?
I have the Enlaughterment channel at the moment. Future plans for Ace of Imagination is to do some live, what I call power trips, and taking people through guided live exercises. So, and that will be announced on the website. You just keep an eye on the website and it'll be there when that happens. But right now the Enlaughterment channel is up, and that can also be reached at the Street Smart Spirit website.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much again, and I will let you know when this podcast is live. So thank you so much, Terry, and I will talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you, Cheryl.
All right. Take care.